Hello, folks, and welcome to the Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross, and today is your favorite day, Talking with Dead Authors Day. And today I have with me Mr. Ray Bradbury. So, how are you today, Mr. Bradbury?
I'm feeling well, thank you.
Well, let me open with my questions now. Do you believe the world is headed in the direction similar to that of Fahrenheit 451? If so, why do you believe the future is headed in that direction?
I believe our future is headed in that direction, and I believe it's headed in that direction for many reasons. My book speaks about a couple of those reasons, but first I would like to say that I do believe the world can be saved. I think that it takes just one person, much like it only took Clarice to open Guy's eyes a little. Or, in today's generation, one movement that can open the world's eyes to how far we have digressed from how life truly should be. Moving on to the talk about the main details. I believe that the world is headed in a dull and fake direction due to the growth of technology and people's dependence on this technology and censorship. Censorship is one of the main topics of my book, mostly because books, our past, are being burned. This takes away a huge amount of personality from the world and really blinds us to what true reality can be. As for technology is really quite the opposite of what the world is now. Technology is very cold and distant. There's no real life to it. Yet people depend on it for so many things now. For those reasons, particularly, I believe that the world is changing.
What brings on these brilliant, whimsical, and terrifying topics?
All of my works are directly from my imagination, but of course they must also begin with an idea. All of my ideas must then be transposed to plots, characters, conflicts, and settings. However, many of the ideas I've come up with have similar themes. For example, many of my pieces are set in the future to show how man could possibly evolve, and through this evolution, one thing that often follows is the growth of technology and its function in everyday life.
Love will evolve to what Guy feels at the beginning of the novel.
In the beginning of the novel, Guy is faced with his wife's attempted suicide. At this time, he's also just met Clarice. During their first conversation, Clarice questions if Guy loves his wife. He then begins to question his love for his wife, as well as his happiness. I think in the context of this novel, love is very much a casualty in how the world has progressed. Love has suffered under the idea of how ordinary and everyday life should function, without conflict. This also brings around the topic of how blindly people were living. They didn't really pay attention to their emotions and were very desensitized to what life or happiness truly was.
Do you consider Clarice a catalyst for the change within Guy?
I most certainly do. While the readers aren't intensely aware of Guy's life before he met Clarice, when I was writing, I pictured him as a very plain man who went along with the way of life without questioning it, even though deep down he felt something was wrong, hence his hidden books. If Guy hadn't met Clarice, however, he wouldn't have had that shift in thought. So Clarice as a catalyst? Most definitely.
What is the significance of your name choices? How do the names Guy and Clarice display their different characteristics?
I chose the names for many reasons. If you look at the name Guy and then Clarice, you can see that they're drastically different in their complexities, much like their characters. Guy is a very simple and almost dumbed-down name, where Clarice is more complex and ornate and whimsical. Guy's simple name represents his blindness to the holes in society, while Clarice's complicated name represents her understanding of a more complex world. These in turn represent both their characters and are by no means coincidental.
What do you think about the similar ear devices that Mildred had in relation to the earbuds we have today?
I think it's very interesting that they're so similar. They are virtually the same thing. It's one of my book's items brought into reality. It's neat to see how they've come to be, and also crazy to see how popular they are. Sometimes I wonder if they got their idea for earbuds from my book.
How do you think the irony you created with firefighters starting fires instead of putting them out serves in your book?
The irony I created with the purpose of firefighters was created to serve as both a show of how different the two worlds are, present when I wrote the book, and future, and to reinforce the idea of government censorship. The whole idea of firefighters now is to put out fires and save people. But in the book, they view saving people in a different manner. They believe by burning the past they are saving them. This shows how different the two worlds are, how such a once humble and brave job has turned into something less.
What knowledge do you think that you can only gain from books?
I wouldn't phrase that question using knowledge, but rather imagination. Books are a perfect source of imagination. In the world of Fahrenheit 451, they aren't open to the use of books. You can also see this paired with their lack of imagination. They are very ordinary and lack creativity. They don't really step out of their boundaries or travel into unknown territory. So, to me, books are a prime way of venturing out of normalcy and imagining even the most impossible.
Does writing these stories that can somewhat predict the future frighten you?
On the surface, yes, but deep down, no. As I said earlier in the interview, I think that it takes one person to change the direction the world is moving towards. So while I do superficially fear the future of mankind, I also have a hope of a greater life. I trust that one person can truly change the world. So I have no fear of the future under certain pretexts.
Your book has been banned in several places. Why do you think that is? What's your response to the book being banned?
I think that banning my book ironically fits into the large theme of censorship and speaks to the direction of how the government plans to move. I understand my book was somewhat controversial because it was criticizing the government and going against some religious values. But my book's purpose was to warn against a change such as the government banning books, and putting my book on the banned book list is just putting mankind at a disadvantage. As humans, we must first be aware of what could be, and my book does that. The next step is to act accordingly to avoid the possible future. By banning my book, people won't be aware of the frightening possibilities of the future.
Who is your favorite character?
I would have to say that my favorite character is Clarice. I say that because of how she lives. If I existed during that time, I feel that I would be similar. At least, I want to say that I would maintain the habits of the past and go against the grain. I think people like her are important to giving the world hope. If everyone is the same and there aren't any Clarices in the world would be a lot less candid and true. I also think that Clarice adds a very unique aspect to my book. She represents a type of innocence in relation to all the corruption and censorship. This is what really makes her stand out. In a world like that of Fahrenheit 451, you need people who are pure. This is another one of the reasons that Clarice stands out to Guy. He's not used to the pureness and innocence like that of Clarice. Guy is used to being surrounded by people who just follow orders. They don't really think about their actions and don't realize what they're doing by burning books.
Would you be friends with Beatty?
Beatty is quite an interesting character, but no. I would not want to be friends with Beatty. Beatty's character is full of hypocrisy. He claims to hate books, yet he has quotes from books memorized. I wouldn't want to be friends with someone who isn't true to themselves or others. That's one thing that people in Fahrenheit 451 lack. They lack truth to themselves. Beatty and other characters like Mildred aren't honest with themselves about what's really happening around them. I think that having someone like that, especially Beatty, would rub off on me, and I would never want to be living in such a fictitious life.
Do you think that in today's society, Clarice would be able to fit in with other teenagers? And do you think she would even attempt to?
I don't think that Clarice would attempt to fit in, and I don't think she would either. I say that she wouldn't attempt to fit in because even in the book she knows she's different from others, but she does nothing to change or conform with them. Even if she did try to fit in, I don't think she would be successful. I say that because even in today's society, picking flowers is a little old-fashioned. I think that people would find her odd and make no move to interact with her.
I imagine Clarice is one of the students in class who teachers think are brilliant, yet students think she's confusing and not bright. That, of course, only speaks to the point of the question, but I believe Clarice's unconventional intelligence will be what would alienate her from the other students.
What was the inspiration for the title of your book?
A very simple response. So simple that it's stated in the front of the book. At Fahrenheit 451, paper burns. The title is to represent the burning of the books. This is iconic to the book and why I wanted it to be front and center and represented in the title. Even the cover of the book shows some relation to fire. For example, one of my book covers is a book pulled out to show matches. This is showing the truth about what happens to books. They burn. The name Fahrenheit is also very unique in that when you look up the word Fahrenheit, my book is the only book that shows up. I think the unique title also speaks to the book. Numbers are very stiff and cold, and often associated with the future. So, by putting numbers in my book title, I was trying to take on a more futuristic tone.
Why do you think your book was able to last over the past few decades?
I think my book was able to last over the past few decades because of the controversial topics, because they stand out against other less fiery topics. For example, my book would be more intellectually challenging than, say, a fairy tale. Also, because my book talks about common things in a new way, such as firefighters, people are more intrigued. The new job of firefighters in my book is so strikingly different. People are often surprised. They've never imagined a firefighter doing the very opposite of what they do now. I've turned the roles of a hero today to what can be perceived as a villain. Yet in the book, they're still displayed as heroes. I think this swap, coupled with controversial topics, censorship and conformity, is a large reason for the popularity and long-term success of my book.
If you were alive today, what do you think you would disapprove of the most?
I would disapprove of how little people read. With the creation of TV, it seems that's all people do. They log hours and hours of TV every day. And with each hour, it seems people's imagination shrinks even smaller. And for kids, instead of playing outside or doing science experiments, they just log hours and hours of TV. What happened to using your imagination to entertain yourself? What happened to reading books to imagine stories, not just viewing what others imagine? The lack of reading is it's sad. And the creation of reality TV shows, sickening. How can people view those shows? They're watching and wasting away their lives while watching other people's lives. One day, man needs to realize that they have to grow up and learn to think independently. We can't remain stagnant while the world moves around us. If we do that, we just become statues.
All of these answers are quite interesting. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today about your book.
Oh, it's quite my pleasure. I find speaking with others about my book very fascinating, sometimes revealing more than what is on the page, and making me think more about my writing, since it has been so long.
Once again, thank you again so much, Mr. Bradbury. All right, folks, we'll see you next week with another episode of Fresh Air featuring Dead Author Day. Next week, we'll be speaking with Agatha Christie.